Thank you, Dr. Furman. Great bridge building towards the presentation of our next speaker, Abigail Jones, Managing Director of Communication with the International Federation of International Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Association in Belgium. And she's going to address the issue of building trust and the innovative approach that the biopharmaceutical industry has been taking.
Thank you very much, Yadin, for the introduction, and Andrew for getting us sort of kind of going in the subject. Since my day-to-day challenge at the moment has been talking with NPR or STAT or some of those media that you showed up there. So that's my world. So hello, everybody. A zillion years ago, I worked for Medtronic, so I actually did get to work with some clinical engineers. So your world is a little bit known to me. I'm representing here the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers. It's a mouthful. And it's also something that, for example, doesn't have George Clooney or, you know, nice Starbucks coffee to be sold. So when we are talking about confidence campaigns reaching out to the general public, this is something that generally as an industry we have not done. And so it just joins the many other things that we're doing as an industry in the COVID environment, and trying to move forward at parallel speed or warp speed to get a lot of things off the ground at the same time. So if you just move on to the next slide. So we represent the large innovative biopharmaceutical companies and also associations around the world. So those of you in the States might know pharma or bio, but we also represent the Philippines and Thailand and Kenya. So we really do have a worldwide view of what's going on. And our job is to represent the industry towards the United Nations bodies. So the WHO, but also the World Trade Organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization and the likes. And also we are asked to represent the industry in a global context. Back in March, 19th of March, 7 days after the WHO declared a pandemic, we came out and said the following things with one voice. And in fact, it was done at a media briefing, a virtual media briefing. We were ahead of the curve. And to a man, unfortunately, in that webinar, we didn't have any women. The industry leaders said that they understood the enormous responsibility we had as society to step up in this context. And so maybe just go on to the next slide. We then, at that very moment, set out what our commitments were in relation to stepping up to this global pandemic, this global health emergency. And again, just, you know, remember, we were talking about this on the 19th of March last year. And we made commitments which were to do everything we could to look at our existing treatments to see what could be useful in this context. I won't go through the full list, but I invite you, if you're intrigued, to have a look at it. But we decided that we were going to advance on a number of fronts to do everything we could to step up for the pandemic. And we were clearly taking an approach that this was not business as usual. You know, we were going to run things in parallel. We weren't going to wait for the business case to decide whether we were going to do something or not. So this is, you know, this was how we kind of got going on the starting blocks. Next slide. And so a fair amount has happened since then. And I'm, you know, if anybody wants a quick, you know, sort of kind of history lesson of my world, these are the kinds of things that have been shaping my world. But the main thing I wanted to flag to you is if you look, you know, we had GSAID, where the genetic sequence was shared on the 10th of January. And then you have the 31st of December, you know, quite usefully bookmarking the year. We have the first WHO emergency vaccine validation for the Pfizer-BioNTech. 1 year from the genome to an effective and safe and tested vaccine. Generally, it takes 10 to 12 years. So a few things have happened in that time, to say the least. The other things on this chart, I'm not going to delve into them, but I would just like to flag. We've done things about looking at ethical considerations for the COVID context. We were the private sector representative along with the developing world vaccine manufacturers for this unique body set up called ACT Accelerator, which is looking at trying to make sure that we do not end up in the same situation as we did with the H1N1, where the developing world bought up all of the vaccines and none were left for the developing world. So, we had a seat at the table as a founding partner on the 24th of April. And here we are, fast forward to today, where COVAX, which is the body that's going to be distributing the vaccines to the developing world, they are going to reach their target for 2021 of 2 billion doses. Numbers game. Generally in the world, flu vaccines not accounted for. Generally, the world capacity is about 3 to 5 billion vaccines a year. Measles, shingles, everything combined. We are today looking at building up from 0 to, let's say, 10 billion vaccines by the end of this year. Again, unbelievable. People don't really realize what's going on. And I think some of you who are very technically minded might actually imagine that the devil is going to be in the detail of making this happen. So that's just a little bit of we'll look back at this slide maybe next year and see how much out of date it is. But anyway, fast forward to the next slides. They will be in your deck that I'm sure will be shared with you. So I'm not going to talk about it, but this is just the landscape, 365 vaccine candidates, amazing. And of which quite a few in phase 3, and as we know, a few that have actually been approved, which is really super important. Next slide, please. And these are the approvals, and this is really something, again, that we need to be careful about, is that the regulatory authorities ideally should not be lent on by politicians to compromise in any way the safety evaluation of the vaccines. And so this is just a snapshot of the vaccines that are getting approved as we speak by the different national and regional regulators. Next slide, please. This slide is giving you a snapshot. I think it's about a week old or maybe 10 days old, so apologies for that. But when we're looking at the number of vaccines that are being rolled out, you've got clearly some leaders. It's not enough by per 100 population, but you can see already that things are ramping up. Again, just pinch yourselves. This is a matter of a month or so since the first vaccines were approved. And although the politicians now have obviously a huge job to do to make sure that they manage expectations in terms of rolling out the vaccine, one has to just realize that this is extraordinary what's being achieved. Next slide, please. So, in a sense, when we were asked to put together our vaccine confidence campaign, this was about early October, people were worried at that stage, and politicians were also worried about vaccine hesitancy. This is a snapshot here of the World Economic Forum and Ipsos, who do periodic reviews. And the first slide on the left, apologies, I missed the title. And the question was, if a vaccine for COVID-19 were available, I would get it. And you can see a snapshot from various countries in terms of people who strongly disagree or somewhat disagree. And you can see that the red and orange down the bottom, there's a bit of an issue in France in terms of confidence for vaccines. There's also, for example, not great in South Africa or Russia or Japan. On the right-hand side, you can see the answer to the reasons for not wanting a vaccine, and the primary reasons being, I'm worried about the side effects and I don't think they'll be effective. So again, Andrew, to your point, people want to understand clearly, and it's totally correct that they want to understand. So we need to work out how we can share what we know with people. So segue into the vaccine confidence campaign. Next slide, please. And the slide after that. So in this particular case, what we are doing is we want to try and tell our story about what we've been doing to make sure that we can say with a degree of confidence that the vaccines that our industry is involved in producing are as safe as any other vaccine. We have not cut corners. We have not gone around this in any different way than we would any other vaccine. We would not put people at risk. So it's about building trust in our vaccines and helping understand what we did to contribute it. We're targeting the healthcare workers in the broadest sense of the word. So hence I'm talking to you today, the general public and our industry, so that our industry employees can talk about it, because we're all being asked by neighbors and family and whatever, it's how the hell did you manage to do it so fast? And there's a campaign. That's the sort of kind of the nuts and bolts of the ComSy world, which is on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And also we have a narrative which we try and kind of build the discussion. So next slide, please. It gives you a snapshot of the narrative. 3 pillars that are looking at appealing to the head, trying to give an understanding of the rational side of things. And then the next slide tries to appeal to the hearts, where we're trying to answer, the next slide please, where we're trying to answer questions like people might have, which is, for example, how can we make sure that people who need the vaccines most will get them? So this is also available. It's almost kind of open source. If anybody needs to try and explain, these points, I'm happy to share and suggest it be shared with everybody on this call today. You please feel free to use it. Next slide, please. So what we've done is we've wanted to talk about the people behind the vaccines, the people who are doing some of the work. And so we've taken people from around the world. We'll be illustrating what we're doing with films, with posts, with bringing more and more people into the story to tell, to explain what they've been doing. But the starting point, next slide please, of telling these people's stories is about them explaining that COVID has affected them too. So for example, we have Abigail, who is in South Africa, and she's been working on the medical affairs side of the COVID vaccines. And she's been worried about her brother who's been treated for cancer. Or for example, we have Isabella in Colombia, who's been working on the policy context for rolling out the vaccines. And she's had a husband and a brother on the front line. And so she's been worried about the vaccine. So we want to be talking about it from the point of view that, everybody is impacted by COVID, but at the same time, we've been doing something else. We've been trying to make sure that we get vaccines that are good for our loved ones, and they're good and they're safe and effective for the world. Next slide, please. So nuts and bolts stuff, there's a website with questions, for example, where we try and actually address some of the questions that people have. I don't know, I'm a vegan, can I have a vaccine, things like that. Next slide, please. We've been talking to lots of stakeholders. For example, the Holy See, the Pope, not directly to him, but the organization that represents him, because religious concerns, there were religious concerns about the vaccines and the way they were, the R&D that went behind them. We've been talking to, obviously, the major global health players that are going to be involved in the rollout of the vaccines. So UNICEF, And we're also talking to a lot of the organizations at the global level, which IFPNA only deals with, for example, the World Medical Association. And we've tested our vaccines narrative, our campaign with all of these stakeholders, and they've received it positively. Next slide, please. So you can actually be part of the campaign too. This is my sales pitch, because this is about a conversation that we need all to have. We've all got, especially you on the call, you're all experts in your field. And that's one thing that's happened over the last year is we've all become experts in COVID, but we've also kind of got our slant and our understanding that we can actually plug into that conversation. So even if you're not the greatest whiz kid, I'm sure many of you are on LinkedIn. So for the next slide, please. So I would just invite you to see if you can join part of our conversation, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Twitter. The stories that we're bringing forwards, the ones that we're bringing forwards, maybe actually, have a link to you. So for example, Abeida's story has a link to the pharmacist because she is a pharmacist. So they're going to be, pushing the message out, in their community. She has a message towards the cancer community. And then Isabella, for example, has a message that's relevant to the International Council of Nurses or the World Medical Association. So basically, I would just invite you to take a look at what we're doing, be part of the conversation, add to the conversation, become part of the team vaccines. That's the end of my presentation. I think there have been questions in the Q&A, so I don't know if I had some time left. I'm not sure if I do. I could quickly try and answer those.
Thank you, Abigail. Let me address the question about question. On the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. Next to it, there is a chat button. For all the audience, chat button, talk to everyone. If you put the question in the QA, it goes directly to the faculty and they can write a response in writing in real time. So I would ask Abigail to take perhaps the first question as it's relating to trust you just talked about, and anybody in the faculty that want to respond, feel free to respond to the question in the Q&A button. Thank you very much, Abigail. Great and clear presentation.